Good morning, everyone.
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. Great to have you all here. We have Liz West, and Maya is going to introduce and tell you more about Liz, and then Liz will show us her beautiful work and her proceedings in making this happening. So Maya, if you, then I will mute myself also.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jeanette. Hello, I'm really happy to introduce Liz West today. Liz is a British artist based in Manchester who graduated from Glasgow School of Art in 2007. Her broad body of work encompasses installations, sculpture, and wall-based art. She creates environments that mix color and light and ignite multi-sensory experiences. Her site-specific installations explore color and our psychological and physical response to it. She has been commissioned worldwide by institutions and organizations including Natural History Museum, National Trust, National Science and Media Museum, London Design Festival, Salford University, Bristol Biennial, and many others. Her latest work, Hundreds and Thousands, a 700-meter-long artwork, has been commissioned by the Greenwich Peninsula for the Tide, which is London's first elevated riverside park, and can be seen at the moment. She has exhibited extensively in the UK, as well as internationally in Italy, United Arab Emirates, France, Germany, Spain, India, and USA. Her last solo exhibition that has just recently closed, I think, was at the Huvinka Art Museum in Finland, and her work can also be at the moment seen in Lille at Tripostal as part of the exhibition Colors that opened just a couple of days ago. We are very honored to welcome Liz West today. Liz, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and joining us today. I give you the word.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction. It makes me seem like you've done so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen so you can see some slides of my work. If I could just remind you to mute, because I can hear quite a lot of feedback. I don't want that to be distracting whilst I talk. That would be fantastic. Okay, so let's hope technology serves me right as I press share. And let's go into a slideshow. Now, can everybody, or can you see that? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, good. Okay. Well, thank you so much to start with for inviting me. It feels very civilized to be speaking to you over breakfast. And I've seen already on some of your screens that you're actually literally physically eating breakfast as we speak. And I've had to kind of rush mine because of course I'm an hour earlier here in the UK. But it does feel civilized to kind of just sit down on a Sunday morning and just talk about colour, which is obviously so liberating and positive, and I think we all need an injection. Unmute me. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, good. So, I mean, my journey of where I started and where I've got to is long and convoluted, and it's not easy, and I'm quite happy to talk very openly and honestly about all the pitfalls, all the celebrations and everything in between. So hold on tight. So where did it begin? Everyone always asks me, you know, oh, why are you an artist? Well, it kind of felt a very natural thing for me to become an artist, as both my parents worked as artists. I'm just trying to move my slides on, and it, oh yeah, there we go. So both my mum and dad had jobs teaching art, but they also professionally worked as artists, very different types of art. So my dad studied at the Royal Academy in London, sculpture, and my mum studied tapestry at the Royal College, also in London. They didn't meet in London, funnily enough. So my mum makes quite intricate drawings and paintings based on architecture, invented architecture, screens, Japanese, interiors, exteriors. So there's a lot woven into her work, literally. And my dad made very literal figurative sculptures, often based on his own portrait, often cast into bronze. And later in his career, he made works that were very finely cast and sanded in plaster, which were often based on his dreams, which he wrote down every single night. And then he would turn that into sculptural works of art. So they're both quite obsessive. They're both perfectionists. They both live and die for their work. You know, they are first and foremost artists. And I would say that I am very similar to that. As is my little brother, who also studied design in goldsmiths in London, and now is a potter, studio potter. So there was no escape in the West Dynasty of being creative. And I never had any inclination to do anything else, to be quite honest. You know, when I was a child, we lived in a small mining town in South Yorkshire, and there wasn't a lot of artists in the community. In fact, when I went to school and had people back to the house for tea, they would look at the sculpture and the artwork on the walls, and they would be baffled by it. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand my dad's nude figures. They maybe were quite offended by it. They just hadn't been around art and design. They hadn't been taken to galleries and museums right through their childhood, like I was lucky enough to be. So it was quite controversial, really. That there was this family based in Barnsley, and we were in Barnsley because that's where my dad's job took him, to teach art and design at the local college. I always enjoyed art. I would always love spending time in my mum's studio, which was in the top floor of the house, very light and bright. And my dad's studio was an outbuilding in the back garden. And my mum would set me up with a little table in her studio, even when I was like 2 or 3 years old. And I would have a drawer in a chest of drawers with all my own materials, inks, glue, sequins, paint, just really interesting things. And I would just sit there and collage and put things together. One of the things I used to really do a lot of was mix ink and PVA glue and then spread it on PVC sheets until it dried, peel it off, and then stick it to the windows like stained glass panels. And actually, when you think about what I was doing there and the interaction between light and colour, not much has changed. So if I got bored of being in my mum's studio, I'd go downstairs, go and knock on my dad's studio door, and he would throw me a lump of clay and say, make something with that. So play for me was being creative, always. And if I wasn't doing that, I was cooking and pretending to host my own cooking show. So it felt very natural for me all the way through school that I got good grades in art, and then going to art school, there was never a question or a doubt that that's what I would do. And here I am, looking a lot thinner and younger at the Glasgow School of Art. And I have to be honest to say that in my first 2 years, I was incredibly depressed. I hated halls of residence. I found it stifling, and I like nice things. You know, I like my surroundings. It's very, very important to me. It's my sanctuary. And of course, now I'm in a position to be able to choose my surroundings more carefully. But when I was a student, it was like the natural thing to go into halls of residence, which were really grotty and utilitarian, and the furniture wasn't very nice. Why would it be? I really struggled with that. My surroundings, are really important. And I think that's one of the reasons I make work about surroundings, placing people in an immersive surrounding. But we'll come on to that a bit later. So I made work in the first 2 years of my degree which was led by the briefs I was given by my tutors. And I felt it was a tick box exercise in order to get the grades, because that's what I'd been used to when I was at high school. But it didn't work like that at the Glasgow School of Art. I think I'd been really, really keen to go to a London art school. That's what I'd kind of dreamt of. I remember seeing all my mum and dad's books on art, and at the time, the young British artists like Tracy Emin and Damien Hirst and Sarah Lucas were really prominent in the UK art scene, and I wanted to be like them, stupidly. I thought that where I had to go was Goldsmiths, because that's where they had all been. And when I didn't get into Goldsmiths, and I can completely see why, I mean, my work does not fit at all with the Goldsmith language. I tried getting into Central St Martin's, to Chelsea School of Art, and to Glasgow School of Art, and I got into all three. So my work couldn't have been that bad. But at this point, I'd never been to Scotland before, let alone Glasgow. So my dad said, get in that car, we'll drive there in a day and back, which is an incredibly long journey. And when we arrived, it was an amazing sunny day. And yeah, it tricked me, because it was never sunny ever in Glasgow. And I loved the art school, the Charles Rennie Mackintosh Mac building, unbelievable. The vibe of the art school, the fact it was kind of in a city, it wasn't a campus-based art school, it was connected to the city. It was a gritty, grey, cultural northern hub, which I liked and felt quite akin with, because I grew up in the north of England. I liked the idea of the tenement houses and kind of living on top of each other in these communities. So I chose Glasgow. And it took me until my final year, and here I am in my first term, my final year, that a tutor must have really seen me struggling, but she also saw me. I think she'd really observed me. She must have felt a connection. She must have seen something of herself in me. And one day she pulled me to one side and took me to her office, and she said, look, Liz, I've been watching you for 2 years now. And you're making work at the moment about things that you're not innately interested in. You're making things that you think you're interested in, but they're not at your core. So you need to really look at yourself and recognize what those things are. You know, what have you been interested in all the way through your life that might be so close to your heart and so kind of in your inner psyche that you might not recognize, rather than making work about, as it was, collections. My dad was a record collector. I had become obsessed with a certain girl band as an 11-year-old and begun amassing their memorabilia when I was 11, mid-90s. And I thought I was interested in pop music. I was. And collections. I was. But why was I interested in that specific girl band that rose to fame in the late 90s? The Spice Girls. What was it about them that I thought I should be making artwork about? Well, they were strong, powerful, vocal women. Okay, the songs might not have been great, but they were catchy. They were all individual. They each had like a different color and a different image. Their image was quite kitsch, bordering on tacky. Their colors were bright and vivid. And I think what appealed to me as a kind of 11, 12-year-old was when they appeared on stage, the lighting, the dynamism, the reflective costumes, the sequins, the glitter. As a preteen, there were certain things that were kind of sparking in my mind that piqued my interest. And as I got older, I realized that it was this, instead of it being actually about the Spice Girls, it was more to do with the spectacle of live performance, or the spectacle of color and light merging together. And as a 20-year-old, as I was in this photograph, or in this photograph, you know, I wanted to believe that that's what I had to make work about. But my tutor said, you know, I've seen you behave and you are incredibly sensual. You're very aware of everything in the room, everything. Like you can hear conversations other people are having across the room as loudly as you can hear this conversation we're having. Not that I'm distracted by that. Or when you go shopping, and we had been shopping together, you would touch everything. So incredibly tactile. You would be very aware of the lighting situation, whether then the lights needed to go on in a space, how the natural light was moving around the space. Like she'd obviously really observed me, and she was like, that's what you should be making work about. You need to go away and think about it. And I did. And I came back, I think it was from the Christmas break. So I had 5 months left of my degree. That was it. So I started making work about coloured spaces. So like in this picture, I did a studio swap with one of my friends and painted the room out completely yellow, dressed in yellow, spent the day in the room and questioned, how did that make me feel? How did this yellow environment have an effect on my psyche, my emotional state? I mean, it was obviously quite intense, but I would write notes. I would invite other people in, ask them, how does this make you feel? Or in the last photograph, I made these kind of coloured visors for myself, which obviously instantly put me in an orange space or a blue space or a green space. Then I started playing around with the idea that my interest was clearly in colour, but was it in pigmented colour or luminous colour? And I was slightly confused about this. So another tutor who had witnessed me making paintings, and I'm not talking in a pictorial sense, these were paintings with coloured pigment paint being injected down surfaces and then pooling at the bottom and creating these kind of blends and psychedelic mixtures at the bottom. A bit like Ian Davenport's work, if any of you know him. And what would happen is these paintings would dry and the paint would lose its sheen and its gloss. And I would become really disappointed in them because the paint would almost die. And then they didn't hold their excitement for me. And so this tutor said, well, why don't you film yourself making these paintings and then project the films into a big space, which you could book in the art school. There was lots of them. Project it into a space and see how that colour feels then. And of course, that's what I did. And that, no pun intended, was the light bulb moment for me, because it was seeing projected colour, i.e. additive mixing, colours in light. They were constantly, eternally wet. I thought, yeah, this is what I'm interested in. And of course, then everything just clicked into place. It's like, yes, that's why I was interested in stage lighting. That's why I was interested in performance and that vibrancy and that kind of delight in things being able to be in flux in colour rather than something being static. So that was the catalyst. And from that point, I would learn how to wire up fluorescent light tubes on YouTube, which was very primitive back in 2006. I think it had only just been established. I would go to lighting shops run by really surly men. Obviously, a woman hadn't stepped foot in the shop for decades, if at all. And I would ask for really technical equipment to take back to the studio and make things with. There was no workshops in the art school for lighting. Yeah, there was metal workshops, there was wood workshops, there was print workshops, but there wasn't lighting workshops. So I had to learn that myself. And here I am in this image looking into my degree showpiece. So within that 5-month period, I absorbed as much information about light as I possibly could. I was like a sponge. But I couldn't let go of the idea of collections at this point, clearly, because my degree show was this long aperture in the wall. And inside the aperture was a mirrored chamber, which seemed infinite. And on the ceiling were strips of yellow fluorescent tubes. And on the bottom was a collection of purely coloured yellow objects. And I'd made collections of all different coloured objects, and they had rules and systems of why those collections had to be made. And these coloured collections had to be deplete of any other colour. So they couldn't have labels on or tags or prints of any other colour. They just had to be purely yellow. And so this field of yellow detritus was what you looked upon in this slide. And I'm just going to go back to this image, because what you can't see is that the saturation coming out of that aperture was so intensely bright that it drew you into it. It made you want to have this quite intimate experience with the work by pressing your face up against the wall and seeing what lay beyond, what was making this glow. What I'd also done is created a light trap corridor. So it wasn't just an aperture, that the artwork was a whole environment that I was creating. I was guiding my viewers into a space, and I was controlling where they walked, where they looked, how they behaved, how they viewed my work, you know, a control freak, basically. So then we come on to this piece, and there's a massive skip in dates here, because as you were just told, I graduated in 2007. And here we are in 2012. Well, what happened in those 5 years? Quite a long time. Well, I graduated and I ran out of money, because during my degree, because I hated art school so much, or the living conditions of art school so much, I just didn't want to ever go home or back to my flats. So what I'd do is, after being in the studio all day, as long as I possibly could be, I would go into the art school library, and I discovered eBay, dangerous territory for any collector. And I would sit on eBay, scrolling through listings of Spice Girls memorabilia, bidding, and winning, spending all of my student allowance and loan. All of the objects would be posted back to my mum and dad's house. So there was mountains of packages arriving. And I was able to buy things that I would never have been able to buy back in the 90s as a child, including costumes and award discs and one-offs. So I'd spent all of my money on Jerry's dresses, essentially. And I didn't have enough money to remain in Glasgow. So I had to move back in with my mum and dad after I graduated, which at the time felt really sad, because all of my friends were staying in Glasgow. Glasgow is really well known for its DIY art scene, where artists remain in the city and do projects, exhibitions together. And I couldn't be part of that. So I remember mum and dad driving up to Glasgow, loading all of my things into their estate car and driving me back home. And I just remember thinking, what the hell do I do now? It's like a full stop. What next? I've got this art degree. I got a 2-1. Okay. I found out eventually what I was really interested in. I made a great piece of work. But what the hell do I do? Well, I'd done a placement at a museum and gallery in my final term. Everyone had to do placements. And I couldn't help but tell the curator about this collection. And she said, well, when you graduate, you should really write letters to museums and galleries across the country and say that you've got this massive collection of things and that you would like to loan it to them and curate an exhibition of it. So that is what I did. And really, in this slot, I should have a slide or a picture of all my collection out on display, because that's what I did. That's what happened. I hired my collection to start with, small galleries, and then Leeds City Museum was opening in 2010. and they took the whole exhibition, the whole collection, all 5,000 objects, and displayed it all in one place for the first time. The exhibition was quite focused on me as the collector, as a young female collector, which is, I think, quite an oddity in the collector's world. And we did a Guinness World Record. So we did an official count, and I ended up with the Guinness World Record for having the largest collection of Spice Girls memorabilia in the world. And I was getting paid enormous sums of money to hire this collection to these museums, which in turn funded me to move to Manchester, which is the city that I'd really liked for a long time. It was closer to home than Glasgow. Glasgow always felt a long way away. And it meant that I could quit my job that I'd done for 3 years as a security steward. Security steward. So I would go to arenas and stadiums and steward football matches and baseball games and pop concerts and rock festivals and political party conferences and rugby matches, and got to meet all sorts of people: Barack Obama, Elton John, Brian May, Pele, crazy people. I guess I was quite good at my job. I always put in everything into whatever I do. I guess that's why I've got a Guinness World Record, because I don't do things by halves. So I was quite good at this job, and I was quite polite to these people. So I would always be put in these like backstage environments where the ordinary stewards wouldn't be allowed anywhere near. So I think what ends up happening in this events industry is you get sucked in as well, because there's a real buzz to live events. I mean, there's a lot of waiting around before and after the events, and there's a lot of tidying up. But when that event is happening, there's such an adrenaline rush. And I just ended up doing it for 3 years. I paid off my student loan. I met somebody who I was with for that 3 years who was also doing the same job. So, you're doing a lot of traveling, you're never at home. It's like a lifestyle. But by hiring my collection to museums, I was able to get out of that, because I knew deep down I wasn't a security steward. I was an artist. And when I went into being a security steward, because my friend did it, and I thought, oh, great, I get to see free concerts. It was hard to find a way out. And I think by earning money in this quite unusual way, I guess I had an asset that I was able to kind of get out of it, and just literally overnight quit and start sending images of my work, my degree show work, to galleries all around the UK, all around the world. I had good photographs of my degree show. I wanted to build up my CV. So I would apply to anything and everything with my artwork, funded by my Spice Girls collection. So it meant that I didn't need to get a job teaching. It meant that I didn't need to get a job in Starbucks. I moved to Manchester, where I found a studio. I applied to an opportunity that I got accepted with, which was a small show of photographs of my degree show, just photographs of it, not my actual physical installation. And the guy who curated this group show was a guy called Mark Devereaux, whose name I could never pronounce. And he said, look, I have a gallery in Manchester, and here it is, his blank space, his gallery, which was a voluntary run gallery. No one was getting paid. They were an organisation who had set themselves up to support artists upon graduation, because they felt that there wasn't enough spaces in cities for young graduates to show work. There seemed like a gap from art school to the big institutions, and they were creating this middle territory. And Mark asked me to submit a proposal for a solo exhibition, which would be my first solo exhibition. And so there you go, that's 5 years gone. That's how we jumped to 2012. And so me and Mark wrote an Arts Council England funding application and managed to get £10,000 to make an exhibition. This is one of 3 works that I made. And instead of the work just being photographs or small installations, this series of works, this body of work was absolutely site specific to this space. So those 4 rooms that you can see on your screen, they were already there. They weren't constructed by me. And normally this gallery would show a group of artists. So there might be a painting in a red room, which obviously wasn't red. I painted it red. There might be a projection in the next room, a photograph in the next room, and so on. And I said, I want to make one piece. I want to colour by lighting, carpeting, and painting each room the most saturate, intense colours. And what I want to do is test our perception of those colours. So that's what we did. In moving to Manchester and dumping, that sounds awful, dumping my boyfriend who I'd been with through my security years. I remember telling Mark, I remember saying, oh, me and Chris have split up. And he said, oh, really? Did you? He said, oh, that's interesting. Why is that interesting to you? He's like, no reason. It's just that, you know, like, would you go out with me? So me and Mark are now married. So that worked out really well. I can now pronounce Devereaux because I have to, because it is my surname. And we got married in 2014. So I got a solo show, I got a husband, and I'm still living in Manchester. So that story is condensed, obviously. But I think in making this show together, we really learned a lot about each other. And when you make a show with someone, the curator and the artist have a relationship, and that relationship has to be fluid and honest and open. So as part of this exhibition, we did a colour therapy session, which was one of the most significant things I ever did, because it invited people in and we all dressed in white. And we spent time in each of these 4 rooms really asking ourselves and each other, how does this make you feel? Now, I could spend every day in the red room. I felt really calm in there. I painted it out and I was completely happy as I painted it. But the green room, I couldn't stand. It felt really like it was attacking all my senses. Whereas Mark hated the red room. It made him feel very tense. But yet the green room, he could happily lay on the carpet and bathe and bask in that green light. So another 3 years has disappeared. So after I made the show at Blank Space, I started showing quite a lot in Manchester. I wasn't being invited to be part of shows, so I did a lot of DIY exhibitions where I'd try and get funding and then find an empty space and make work in that space. And it was often quite a small scaled stuff, human scaled, I would call it, with lights. And the work would always question the space. It would always be site specific. There might be a reflective element that illuminated parts of the architecture or the building that you might not normally recognize. It put you as the viewer in that space. The work always felt like it belonged. It always grounded the person. And it always cast an overspill of light in the space, but it was small. But I wasn't really in love with it. It didn't sing to me. And I guess what I had to do between 2012 and 2015 was really, again, do what I did on my degree and really ask myself a lot of questions. Why am I an artist? Why do I love colour? Why do I use light? And so I went to Kirchvitter's Merzbarn in Cumbria. And I took my best friend, a Canadian girl called Alana, And we were there for a week. We slept in a manky old caravan. We had the run of the whole site. We had to feed the chickens and pee in the woods, build our own fires and make work. And I went thinking I was going to fabricate all these amazing artworks. I was going to be really productive. And I just wasn't. I just got there and didn't know what to do. I hit an artist block. And I just remember phoning Mark in tears and what do I do? And he said, well, cover the gallery walls in paper or whatever you've got and spend the duration of the week writing, just not all the time, but just as and when ideas come to you, just ask the big questions and just keep adding to them. And that's what I did. I spent a lot of time reading critical books on colour and light, and I had a library, so that was easy. And over the duration of the week, I mean, 7 days, it's not that long. I filled the walls with text about myself. And on the last day of the residency, Alana sat down with me and Mark drove up to Cumbria, and we sat there and we critiqued what she'd made. She'd been really productive, and what I'd written. And was intense, to say the least, but it really helped me. It really picked out and illuminated what I had to do next and what it was I was really, really, really interested in, and why the hell I was an artist. Well, first thing was, I am an artist. Like I was born an artist, and I'm going to die as an artist, and I can't do anything else. I mean, there was a point, there was a crossroads where I nearly did lighting design, theatre lighting design. But I'm an artist. There's no retirement plan. Like, I am an artist. That's what I'm going to do forever. Not short of ideas now, because I figured out that, like, I have this checklist of I would say 5 things that I have to implement and has to be apparent in every work I make. It has to include vivid colour, luminous light. It has to be site specific. It has to be immersive. And lastly, it has to question people's perception of that space and colour. And if I make a piece without any of those 5, it doesn't work, and it's not mine, and it hasn't got my voice. So at this point, it was 2014, and there was a lot of spaces available in Manchester, this one included. This was an ex-supermarket headquarters. It's been an office space. All furniture had been taken out, and there's 8 floors of it. And a gallery in Manchester had brokered the use of this space for artists in the city. Mark, being a curator, had been given a whole floor for the artist he represented to test and make work in. Work that was bigger than that you could make in your studio space. There was another floor, the floor above him, the 4th floor, this floor, which was available to hire for £60 a week, and people could just do what they wanted in it. And so I said, I really want to do something on this floor. You know, it's 10,000 square feet, maybe more. What could I do? I mean, I had nothing. I had no materials. We had no money. But I did have a bag of theatre gels, filters, which I'd been given. You know, just scraps, literally scraps and odds and ends of theatre gels. And I remember thinking, well, when you wrap a lamp or a light bulb in this gel, it has this really immersive light effect. Like it casts more colour in a space than if you were to paint it. So I did little tests on Mark's floor, which I would say was about the size of the blue zone in this image. And I had loads of ideas. I had ideas to do something with columns, which wouldn't have really done anything. I had ideas to cut squares of this filter and tape it round the lighting grates, which I tried. And what you got is this really direct patch of colour on the floor. And then I decided to pull down the lighting grates and underneath that reveal the lamps and individually wrap the 400 bulbs in the space. No, 400 fixtures. There was 4 lamps in each, so 1,600 bulbs in the space by myself. And that took 5 days. And there was a rationale for why I started with blue at one end and worked my way through to magenta at the other side of the space. And that was because this was January, dark, depressing. I have seasonal affective disorder, so I'm really not great in the winter months. My spirits are pretty dampened. And so I guess one of the reasons why I make the work I do is to help my own well-being above anybody else's. I mean, as soon as I make the work, it's like I give it away. It's everybody's, it belongs to everybody. But it definitely helps my own well-being in the creation of it, in the making of it, in the presentation of it. And this exhibition was open in the evening only for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, because that was it. That was the week, 5 days installed, 2 days open, done. And at about 3-4 o'clock in a January evening, the sky was that amazing sapphire color, magic hour, dusk. And it was the same blue that you see at the end of that space. So I wanted to have that moment where the spectrum went through the space and then extended through the window and out into the sky and beyond. So I didn't know if this piece was going to work until it was finished. Then I started promoting it. And I got a friend to take some images, including this one. He literally took 5 images and he gave me his memory card. And I took his memory card and uploaded the photographs. There was no editing. I don't have Photoshop, and Instagrammed them. And people came. It was like word of mouth. People started saying, there is this artwork, there is this exhibition that Liz has done. Bearing in mind that I was kind of familiar with the Manchester art scene at this point, that's open for the weekend only. And there was no natural footfall. There was a poster on the door downstairs which had my telephone number on. People had to be let in and put in a lift 4 floors up, and they would walk into this immersive space. And hundreds of people came. Now, I thought for the next 3 weeks that I would be back in the studio making work normal. That didn't happen. The next 3 weeks, first of all, I had to pull it down on the Sunday evening at 8 o'clock once the exhibition closed, literally rip it down. It took 2 hours to take down and hand back the key. And for the next 3 weeks, I spent sending out press releases. I wrote the press release myself. I researched lighting, people who were interested in lighting, basically. So that was art curators, art museums, lighting professionals, architects, design. I think at this point I realized that my work had this really interesting crossover between all those mediums. So I remember emailing the Emma Cogswell at the ILD and saying, look, I've just made this work. And she said, oh my God, I'm going to send this to all the professional lighting industry magazines because they would love this. I mean, before that, I had no idea that this industry even really existed. So this piece served me well. And this was almost like the catalyst of everything that's come since. This was like the beginning. Forget everything I've done before. This was the point of no return. That's my screen. Yeah, there you go. So the machine had started. And all of a sudden I was being approached to remake versions of it, like here at the Bristol Biennial, where I submitted images of previous piece and they found a space in Bristol, again, interestingly, an ex-office space. The images make it look so easy. This was not easy. The floor was covered in green carpet tiles just a week before this image was taken. And that all had to be ripped up, every single tile. We didn't know we could flip them because they were all covered in like sticky carpet glue. And then the technician found out they could flip them and they were all kind of new and shiny, which created this amazing mirrored effect, which was slightly unintentional, but makes the work in argument. The windows, there was a lot of them, each had to be covered in blackout fabric, and the blinds closed, and each strip of each blind had to be facing in the right direction. But by this point, I was now starting to have relationships with lighting manufacturers, which meant I was being given free things. So instead of using a bag of off-cut filters, which I was literally having to tape together to make big enough, I was now being given rolls of theatre gels by Roscoe or Lee filters, whatever colour I wanted. So I could really make this piece in as much detail as I wanted. And again, you know, it was only open for a week, but people came and people loved it, and people brought their pets, people brought their children. If you closed your eyes, it sounded like a swimming pool. Shrieks of delight were being heard. People brought their instruments and played music in it. It was weird. People felt uninhibited in this space. And I think that's the power of colour. People just felt this innate urge to just do and be creative in this space. Children would just want to run from one side to the other as fast as they could, like as if they were in a playground. Take out the colour and they were just in a really boring ex-office space. But filled with colour, it had this amazing energy to it. And it was amazing to see, you know, I'm often there in the side wings, just watching, observing how people behave when they're in these otherworldly environments. So let's face it, you don't get to go and walk through a spectrum every day of the week. We live in this really visually noisy world where we are, let's face it, constantly just scrolling through our phones, pressing like, and we've forgotten the art of seeing. We don't look up and look around as much as we should do. So I guess my work, in essence, is trying to just do this simple thing of doing that. Put your phone down and look, and just observe what's around you in closer detail. And hopefully when someone walks out of one of my exhibitions, they are more aware, their perceptions are heightened, and they're more aware of what's around them, and they're looking. I also started making work, this piece was made in the same year, taking experiments of colour theory, science of light, and making those theories real, making them immersive. So here, an additive mix, a concept that I'd always been interested in since I graduated. Creating white light through all the colours. And in the ceiling rig here, there's 250 6-foot fluorescent lamps, each individually coloured, but collectively making white light. And as you can see on my body, I'm not all stripy as the floor is, but I'm basking in this really beautiful, warm white light. This piece was made for the National Media Museum for the exhibition that celebrated UNESCO's International Year of Light in 2015. In that same year, I was also invited to make my first outdoor piece, which was a complete challenge in itself, because it's a whole different rule book. The material considerations are different. The structural considerations are different. Gone are the days now where I'm integrating just simple things like filters into pre-existing lamps. I'm now constructing things from scratch into the public realm. So, I mean, this piece was a nightmare to make because me and the fabricators had never made anything like this before. But I'd done a site visit, and all around me, I just saw glass, concrete, and steel. There was no colour. Like these urban realm environments that we're so used to are just depleted of colour. And these are spaces we inhabit and move around daily. And I just felt really strongly that if I was going to be commissioned to make a public piece of art, it wasn't ever going to be just a piece on plinth or a statue. It was going to have to be something that was immersive. People could enter into it and be completely cascaded in coloured light. And that when you entered into this structure, you could look around you and your whole surroundings became saturated. It was also playing on theories of light. So a sundial, a giant sundial, and the shadows of the colour would move around as the sun did. So this piece is still alive. It's in Leeds. It's there's going to be a second version of it made this summer for Media City UK in Salford, but this was made 6 years ago. So I also thought it'd be interesting for you to see my process as well, because obviously it's all well and good just showing you the end result there, which is looking splendiferous in its surroundings and doing exactly what I wanted it to do. But how did I get there? Well, sometimes it starts with a very crude drawing on the back of an envelope, which this was. So when I made the spectrum that ran through the space, a curator of an art gallery based in Scunthorpe in Northern England came and saw that exhibition and said, I want this in my space. And I said, I'd love to work with you, love to make something in your deconsecrated church building, but I can't cover pre-existing lamps with theatre gels because they don't exist. So I started doing a lot of site visits and just sitting in the space and thinking, what does this space need? And I remember making this drawing one breakfast. And I very clearly had this in my mind. And it was just a way of communicating how that would feel. So the church, you couldn't fix anything to the floor or the walls or the ceiling. So I had to think of a modular piece of art that could be packed up, taken anywhere, but not fixed to anything, not affect the building in any way. And I remember sitting on the floor of this building and just looking at the way that the light moved around the space, and that how once there would have been stained glass window colours in the window. There weren't anymore because it was being used as an art gallery, but how I wanted to take the palette of a stained glass window and basically pour it onto the floor. But how I wanted, when the light from the windows came in through and into the building, bounced off the mirrors on the floor and then illuminated parts of the building that you would never normally look at. As you can see in the top right hand corner, that colour is illuminating parts of the ceiling. This piece is toured all over the world. Here it is in Berlin, here it is in Finland just a few weeks ago. And each time it moves, because it's modular, I can adapt it and remake it site specifically. So I take, say, like I did in Havinka, the dimensions of the space and make the work feel like it truly belongs. And I'd always wanted to see it in a white cube because I knew that those orbs of cast light would just be so gorgeous, and to be using the daylight rather than artificial light to create that was really important to me. Now, unfortunately, if I just go back to this piece, as an aside, what I will say, and this is important to say, is when the sun didn't shine, you didn't get beams of cast light illuminating the ceiling. And this was in the summer. This was a British summer. This was in May. And I remember my mum and dad coming to see it on a really dull day, and my dad saying, Liz, this piece ain't working. And I was like, yeah, but I can't control every single element always. Now, sadly, this was the last of my exhibitions that my dad ever saw, because at that moment he was terminal with lymphoma cancer, which he'd had for 7 years, but his prognosis was no good. 3 weeks later, my dad passed away, and the title, Our Colour Reflection, was always very meaningful to me. It had this double meaning. It's literally a colour reflection, but it also, you know, I was doing a lot of reflecting of myself at this time, and doing a lot of questioning, and, you know, things were definitely up in the air, and it was an incredibly emotional, sad time. And this week is 5 years. It's 5 years now since I lost Dad. And I can't believe that he didn't see this and everything else that came after. I wish he could. But my mum can. And so she's definitely a champion, which is nice. So whilst he was dying, pretty much, like in his final weeks, I was ploughing on. The only way I could cope with losing a parent was to throw everything into my work. And I was really, really, really productive. I'd been commissioned by the Natural History Museum to make a piece for them. And again, I thought I'd show you the process. It was a piece that had to celebrate colour and vision. The exhibition was called Colour and Vision. So I decided to base the work on the principle of Isaac Newton, seeing the spectrum for the first time through a prism. And so I wanted to use dichroic glass as well, because the exhibition itself had specimens in it that were iridescent, so beetles, butterflies. And so I wanted to kind of combine these two ideas of the dichroic and the prism. So my work was a prism. And I worked with architects, exhibition designers, I mean, a huge amount of people to make this work, 30 people, maybe more. And we worked through, sampling, mini maquette, and then here we are looking at the work itself. So you'll see that there's a fine white line running through the center of this work that just let us know that that light is actually white light. Now these are LEDs, had to be cold light because there were specimens on the other side of the wall. And if I'd have used fluorescent light, you know that they're like little heaters, and I couldn't use anything warm. So I found a company who manufactured them, clad them in dichroic glass, which was shipped from Frankfurt. That was a nervous few days. 14,000 pounds worth of glass could have got quite badly smashed. And yeah, that thin white crack, just alluding to that chink in Isaac Newton's curtains, allowing that band of white light to come in, hit his prism, and then see the spectral colours in front of him. I've also had the chance to make permanent outdoor pieces again. It's a whole different rule book. Paddington, London. It's there now. It was there 3 years ago. And how you can see the backbone of the structure being gradually clad in my colour to make this piece colour transfer. And there's so many bridges that are just disgusting. And the litmus test for me as a female, young female, is can I walk through that bridge without looking behind me and fearing my life? And I really feel that you shouldn't have to do that. No one should have to do that. But being given the opportunity to make a piece of artwork that aided that transition from A to B and make that environment feel safe was really important. So when I was first asked to propose this piece of work, again, it was literally a really crude sketch, and the process of making this lasted 2 years. So it wasn't just like, ta-da. It was bureaucratic and difficult, and there had to be 2 rounds of planning permission because the wall belonged to 2 different people. But it's up. And in the time it took me to propose this work and it be made and installed, I had conceived and given birth to a baby. So this is how long things take. Now, I've made a lot of work in the last 5, 6, 7 years, which is all on my website, but I realized that time is running out. So I thought I'd show you my very latest piece, which is again an outdoor, but this time temporary piece, but taking the idea of a sundial. And this piece was made is made in Greenwich, which of course is the meridian line, the Greenwich meridian line. So isn't it the perfect thing to make a sundial on the Greenwich meridian? And this piece uses the sun to activate the work, which was made on a pre-existing structure, hundreds of meters of glass panels. And when I was invited for a site visit, I just thought, my God, I've got to use these pre-existing panels because they're a ready-made canvas for me. Why try activating this site with color and light by something sculptural that maybe sits on the floor that you look down from the structure and see? Just didn't seem right. But even on a wet day, you're getting these amazing reflections in the puddles, and on a sunny day, it just comes to life. Now, this piece of work has been extended right through the summer. Again, I'm kind of skipping over the details of it, but this piece has been 2 years in the making. It was originally destined to be constructed and installed in November. Scuppered by COVID, it was pushed back to January. Scuppered by COVID again. We all agreed that no matter we install it in March, and it was always going to have to be taken down in May. And so that felt a real shame. So I feel really blessed that this piece has been allowed to stay in right through the summer. It's interesting that I conceived it as a winter-based piece of work, whereas actually it is, of course, a spring-summer piece. So I just want to thank you all for listening. I'm sure a lot of you have gone back to bed. But if you want to follow me on Instagram or check out my other work on my website, please do. And I'm open to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Liz, for this wonderful talk, and seeing the reactions. I think everybody agrees. It's really interesting, and your work is incredibly nice. The colors are vibrating, and it's it really touches you. So I will ask the questions that the public has written down. The first one is from Sophie Mouton-Brice. I'd like to know if there are any colors Liz prefer to work with, and why?
That's a really good question. So I normally take the palette of colors available to me within that material. So first and foremost, I'm obsessed with materials. I have all these drawers behind me filled with sample books and swatches. And when I consider making a piece of work, I think of what materials I want to use. And often that material then dictates the palette. I will take, let's just do it. Let's just do it right now. So I will take a sample book like this. And I've decided for this next piece of work I'm making that I want to use this really interesting material, which looks like flat color, but when you shine a light at it, it pings out. Like it's what's used for road signs. So when your car lights shine, it glows. And so this is basically my palette. And I looked at this and I thought, right, I do not want to use black. I do not want to use gold. So I always kind of firstly deduct which colors I'm going to take out and then what I'm left with. Now, obviously that's a really limited palette for me, and I've whittled that down to about 7 colors. But I will always take out the golds, the silvers, the bronzes, the coppers, the whites, the blacks, the browns, the greys. Not that I'm not interested in those colours, and I certainly for works, some blacks do sit and make the colours pop. Obviously, if you put a colour on a grey background, it's going to show its true colour. But I hate brown. I will never use brown. I hate it. It's just such a dull, disgusting colour. And I think, do I have a favourite colour? No, that would be wrong for me. When, say, I was making my yellow chambers in my last year of my degree show, I fell in love with yellow. I had always hated yellow before that, but I really saw how lively and energetic and intense and powerful it was. So I have a relationship with each colour individually, I would say.
Okay, thanks for answering this question. Another one, do you see yourself, this is from Alexandra Loske, do you see yourself in a line of women who embrace the subject of color in their work? Or do you think color is something that is completely gender neutral? I'm interested in where women place themselves in color history, which is, like many other areas, historically dominated by men? Thanks, says Alexandra.
Yeah, Alexandra, I agree. It is dominated by men. And often when I'm approached for opportunities, they always say, oh, there's so many artists making work with light and colour that are kind of middle-aged men. James Turrell, Olafur Eliasson, Dan Flavin was, Robert Irwin. It's like the roll call of men, and there are very few women making work about it. And certainly when I started making big, immersive, monumental, scaled works, and I think that's the crux of it. I don't think it's about colour. I think it's about scale and about taking on the space. And quite a lot of people would say to me, oh, I thought this was a guy's work. What? Like, for me, this work is so like feminine. Like, I think my choice of colours is really feminine. I think it's elegant and all the pronouns of a woman. But because I was taking on scale, that's what was getting people confused. And I don't know why that is. It's embarrassing. That's why it seems to be. And I apologize to the men in a way, because why should they be just the ones known for making the big pieces? Why are women scared of making these big pieces? Or is it just that men and women are scared of big spaces? I don't know. All I can say is I'm like just so passionate about colour, and I am not afraid of space. I put them together. I'm more scared of small space. I do think that colour is universal in its language. I think talking about artwork in general, I think it is gender neutral. I don't think that applies to light art. I think there's a different conversation for both the mediums. Big question, complex.
Right. Another one. Yelda. You said you felt good in red light therapy, but not in blue light. Do you think it is personal?
Yes.
You have a chance to observe the effects on other people.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I said, I always am there watching from the sidelines. Or, when people go to my exhibitions, they might talk about it on social media. And if I see I'm kind of watching that, I will write to them and say, how did that make you feel? What did that do to you? And it seems that we go through our lives building memories and building experiences. And those experiences and lived memories are based on colours. It's what's around us. And so we all have these individual connections to individual colours. And so I think that's why some of us have these really strong reactions to certain colours. And it is just based on ourselves. It's a self-portrait.
Okay, Lorenzo Bovituti wants to know, you gave us your 5 pillars checklist. Would you accept them to change over time? Is the first question.
Right, let's answer that. And I can see the question in front of me. Got the chat open. No, because it's taken me quite a lot of time and soul searching to get to where I am now. However, I don't see that my interest in colour and light combined is ever going to wane. This is kind of me. This is my voice now, and it is what I've always been interested in, to the point where when I was a child, I would separate my felt tipped pen out in colour order, or I would line up my nail polishes on the windowsill in the colour order. So it's just always been there. I think the last point on the checklist is the one, the kind of perception one, is the one that's kind of slightly more ambiguous. Because of course, it's not just those 5 things that I'm trying to do. There's so much more that I'm trying to say in my work. But what I do want is my work to be accessible on every level. So even for children, I want it to be enjoyable and accessible. But if you wanted to search deeper and scratch the surface more, that there is very intellectual considerations going on in the work that are about really finite and technical theories of light and colour and bringing those to life. So yeah, I don't want people to have to read a piece of text to be able to understand my work. I want people to just maybe just enjoy it for what it is, and then if they want to access more information about it, they can do. So yeah, the list it doesn't change that much. The last point maybe does. And then you asked, have you ever received reactions from colourblind people? Yeah, really interesting. And people that have synesthesia and all different kinds of visual impairments. I mean, I'm really interested in this. And actually, I would quite like to make work about people with colour blindness or synesthesia. So watch this space. The next question, are you familiar with the Russian composer? No. Kandinsky, synesthesia. So yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing. Give me time. Do you ever work in the natural environments as opposed to buildings? Yes, I do. Just didn't show any slides of it. The natural environment I have done, and I've found much harder because of it being more in constant flux, growing. You know, I'm really interested in gardening and plants, and I'd quite like, I've got loads of ideas for artworks I want to use using planting purely. Good question. Yeah, I think I've just been really selective over what slides I've shown you this morning. So you have to go and do some more research on me.
Okay, there's one from Adrian Luca. I have a question regarding your policy of conservation for your public artworks. How long do you guarantee them, and what happens when the colors fade out?
Yes, so I do have to give very strict conservation instructions and care instructions, maintenance agreements to the commissioner, which it isn't just me giving it to them, it's a conversation. So when I'm being put in commission, there will be a conversation about the materials I want to use, and often the materials are chosen because of their longevity. So there'll be manufacturer guarantees and data sheets that say how long that colour will be at its most intense for. And quite a lot of warranties, some of them are 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 12 years. Often, the longer, the more expensive the materials become. For outdoor permanent works, I would say they have a lifespan of about 10 or 15 years. Sometimes it's a conversation of, okay, the structure is permanent, it's galvanized steel, that's going to last 25 years. But the fascia has a lifespan of 7 years. So that modular element can be replaced after 7 years. So then that's in the maintenance agreement. Sometimes manufacturers say, okay, it's going to last 7 years, but then they don't want to tell you what happens after that, probably because they don't know. Will the colors fade? Does it lose its vibrancy? Does it, I don't know, does it stop reflecting light? What happens after 7 years? Nobody knows, I guess. Sometimes that's because the product hasn't been alive for 7 years for anybody to test and actually know what happens. Sometimes commissioners are quite happy to take a risk. And for me to say, okay, it says it's got a shelf life of 5 years. What happens after that? We don't know, but let's test it. Let's figure it out. Let's see what happens when we get there.
Okay, I just wrote down some keywords that people are mentioning in their chats, and maybe it concludes a little bit what they feel about you and your work. Beautiful, brilliant, lively, joyful, happy, wonderful, fascinating, fantastic, amazing, sincere, courageous, moving. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Wow.
Okay. I think we can end the Sunday breakfast talk here.
Oh, I don't want to go. Thank you so much.
Go. Yeah. Okay. Janet, can you take over?
Yes. So thank you all very much. Liz, thank you for sharing this very moving life story, actually, of how you came to where you are now. It was really inspiring, beautiful. Really hope to be able to visit England one of these days when COVID is gone.
Go to Lille, go to see my work in France. It's like right next to you.
Yeah, okay, but we can still not travel to France, or we have to go into quarantine. So it has to, we have to wait a little bit, but for sure we're going to visit it. It was very inspiring. Thank you so much. And I would like to take the opportunity to also invite you all for our next speaker for next month. That's going to be 27th of June. Axel Beuter, I think I pronounce his name correctly. He is going to be our next speaker, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. After training as a stonemason and working as a restorer and freelance stone sculptor, he studied architecture. And in his design practice, Axel Beuter realized numerous projects in the field of architecture, exhibition design, scenographic and media art. And then, one moment. He is one of the world's leading color experts and the most renowned color researcher in German-speaking countries. And as a frequent studio guest, interview partner, author, and numerous film articles, interviews, publications, and lectures, he is known to a wide public. He realizes projects in the field of color design for private clients, institutions, and industry. So he is very, how can I say, if you check out his website, you can see how much things he does with color. I think we can maybe, Maya, could you maybe share his website in the chat? So if people want to find out.
I think everyone has gotten an email link actually in our newsletter. I think.
Yes. So yeah,
let's drop it now.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. In the newsletter, there's a link for our next speaker. So please check him out. It's going to be also very interesting. So for now, have a nice Sunday. Hope to see you all next month. And take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a nice Sunday. Thanks a lot, Liz.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Janet, you can stop recording.